Chapter 4, specific factors and income distribution. The chapter 4 is with a specific factor model, right? We studied Ricardian model in chapter 3, right? And chapter 4 is specific factor model, and chapter 5 was Heckscher-Ohlin model. Chapter 6 was neoclassical model, traditional trade model, isn't it? So we studied this one and this one, right? And this, including these three, we said neoclassical model, right? And so chapter 4, specific factor model, is one special case of neoclassical model under the assumption that perfectly competitive market structure, okay? So actually, in economics, specific factor is not so important. But in political science, right, this one is emphasized. Okay? And sometimes this specific factor model is used to argue against the neoclassical model. But that kind of structure is something misleading. Okay? Structure is introduction, specific factor model, international trade in the specific factor model, income distribution, and gains from trade, blah, blah, blah. Okay? Introduction. If trade is so good for the economy, why is there such a position? Two main reasons why international trade has strong effect on distribution of income within our countries. Resources, factors cannot move immediately or costlessly from one industry to another. Ricardian or Heckscher-Ohlin model, right? Labor and capital can move quickly from in competitive sector to competitive sector, right? And produce more than before, okay? But in real world, right, that is not true, right? For example, in agriculture, Korea has a comparative disadvantage in agricultural sector, right? For example, and comparative advantage in car production, right? After trade, neoclassical model predicts that labor in agricultural sector, right, transfer to manufacturing sector to increase GDP, simply talking. That's the secret why per capita GDP and GDP increase after trade. But in real world, that is not sometimes something misleading. Why? Usually average age of agricultural farmers is over 80s. They cannot get a job in Hyundai Motors or Kia Motors. It's not possible, right? So factor mobility is matter, right? So factor mobility, factor, for example, labor is not mobile, right? Factor mobility. Some factor is not quickly moved from one to the other without any cost, okay? So specific factor model focus on this assumption. Until now, factor mobile, but specific factor model said labor is not mobile. Okay? So second reason is this, that industries differ in factors of production they demand. So that is fully explained in Heckscher-Ohlin model. Okay? The specific factor model allows trade to affect income distribution. So political science main focus is distribution of power, distribution of income, right? So they prefer specific factor model instead of Heckscher-Ohlin or Ricardian model because they have more concern in income distribution. Okay? Assumption of model is basically same. There are two goals. Q1 and Q2. There are two goods, Q1 and Q2. So consumption of two goods, C1 and C2. Right? But there exist three factors, labor, capital, and land. Also a perfectly competitive market. So Q1, production function of Q1. So for example, Korea has a comparative advantage in manufacturing sector. Right? Manufacturing car. Production function of car is function of labor and capital. Right? And production of agricultural good too. That is in competitive sector in Korea, isn't it? That is function of Q2, L2, and T2, rent. Right? That is the basic idea of a specific factor model. Q1 is function of labor and capital. Agricultural production, food, is function of L2 and rent. Right? So a little different, isn't it? So labor, so factor mobility. So in the specific factor model, assume that labor is mobile between two sectors. Labor can move one sector to the other. So labor, full employment condition of labor is L1 plus L2 is L bar. Labor supply, labor demand in sector 1, labor demand in sector 2. Right? What happened in capital and land? Capital is specific factor of manufacturing car. Right? Specific factor of car production. So K1 is equal to K bar, all the capital. Right? Employed in sector 1. And T2 is T bar. Okay? So these two conditions have no meaning. Only this one matter in this specific factor model. Okay? So Q1, slide number 6. Q1 produced using capital and labor, but not rent. Q2 or food produced using rent and labor, but not capital. Labor is a mobile factor that can move between sectors. So we can construct free employment condition of labor like that. Land and capital are both specific factors used only in the production of one good. Okay? So we said specific factor model. So slide number 7, I already explained. How much of each good does the economy produce? The production function for Q1 gives a quantity of Q1 that can be produced given any inputs of capital and labor, L1 and K1. Okay? Production function of Q1. Production function of Q2 is this one. I already explained. Our textbook explained in slide number 8. How does economics mix of output changes as labor shifted from one sector to the others? So slide number 9 explain production possibility frontier. Okay, production possibility frontier. But we already full version of production possibility frontier, right? In the some first part of this lecture, microeconomic foundation lecture. Okay. So it's very simple story. So production function. Now think about production function of Q1 is this one, right? So we know that production function is like this. Production function is like this. L1, Q1, shaped like this, isn't it? Right? L1, Q1. So similarly, production function of Q2 is L2, Q2, for example, like this. That is production function of Q1. So exactly, accurately expressing Q1 is L1 and K1 or K bar, right? And Q2 is equal to Q2, L2, T2 or T bar, like this. That is production function. And this one explained in slide number 10, 11, 12, right? Like this. From here, we can, okay, marginal product of labor is shaped like this, right? Marginal product of labor is function, MPL1 is function of labor and capital, right? So we already studied this in the microeconomic foundation. So similarly, we can calculate the marginal product of Q2, L2, right? Anyway, so also we know L1 plus L2 is L bar, right? Total domestic supply of labor should be demanded by sector 1 plus sector 2, right? So total amount of labor is constant, right? That is L bar. then at any point in this straight line means labor allocation between two sectors, L1 and L2, O1, O2, like this. Right? Using this production possibility, two production functions, Q2, and this free employment conditional labor, we can construct production possibility frontier. Right? So as some simple version, a full version, how to derive production possibility frontier is explained in intermediate microeconomics using Edgeworth-Sparks story, right? Edgeworth-Sparks story. But now we study simplest version. How? I'd like to explain there, right? Okay, I'd like to draw here. Now, think about this kind of graph, right? That is L1, that is L2, right? Then L1 plus L2 is L bar. Then L2 is equal to L bar minus L1, right? So L2 is equal to L bar minus L1. If L1 is 0, then that is L bar, right? And if L2 is equal to 0, then L1 is L bar. And slope of this curve is, what is this one? This minus 1, right? This graph is this one, right? This one is L1 plus L2 is L bar. Can you understand? And now think about production function, Q1, right? L1 increase, then Q1 increase, right? Now think about this is a production function, right? That is labor allocation, figure of labor allocation. Production function is labor employment increase, production of Q1 increase, right? So production function of Q1 is like this. That is Q1 is equal to Q1 L1 K bar, right? Now think about that is Q2. Then labor employment increase, Q2 production increase, right? So we can construct this kind of Q2 production function, right? Q2 is function of L2 and T bar. That is production function. Then, starting from here, we can construct production possibility frontier. What is the definition of production possibility frontier? Production bundles of two goods, mix of two output, Q1 and Q2. This economy can afford with maximum. Okay, now we start from this point. This point means L1 is L bar. L2 is equal to 0, isn't it? Then, L1 is L bar. Then, maximum production of Q1 is this one, right? Then, that is Q1, isn't it? Right? And Q2 should be equal to 0. So, this point, right, have a one-to-one relationship with this one. This point means L1 is L bar, L2 is equal to 0, right? This point equivalent to this point, right? That is Q1M, maximize Q1. That is one-to-one relationship is Q1 maximum and Q2 production should be equal to 0 because L2 is 0, Q2 equal to 0. Also think about the other extreme point. This point means L1 is equal to 0, right? L2 is L bar. Okay? Then what happens? Q1 is equal to 0 because L1 is equal to 0. L2 is L bar. Then Q2 is this one, Q2M. Can you understand? Then that is Q2M. Okay? Now think about, for example, this point. Labor and capital allocated at this point. That means that is L1, for example, 0, right? And that is L2, 0, like this, right? Then labor L1 is L1, 0, then, right? That is L1, 0, L2, 0. Then what happened in production of Q1? Q1, using this labor, this country can produce this one, Q1, 0, right? And employing this amount of labor, L2, 0, then we know that this one, that is Q2, 0, right? So Q2, 0, Q1, 0, so this point is one-to-one relationship with this point, allocation of labor, L1 plus L2 is L bar at this point 0. How can I say? We say point A. Then that is A, 0 change to A. Q to A, like this. That is point A dash. A and A dash. Right? Also think about point B. Labor allocation happened at this point B. So we said B. Right? Then this means that is L1 B. Then this one means L2B. Right? So using this L1B amount of labor, this country can produce Q1B. So Q1 production increased because more labor employment in sector 1. Right? How about L2B is here, then Q2B is here. This point. Right? Less labor employment in sector 2 compared to point A. Then production of Q2 also decrease. Right? Q2B, Q1B. So this point is B prime like this. Can you understand? Right? So we can repeat this kind of process at any point on this graph. Then we can get this kind of graph. All right? This kind of production possibility frontier. Can you understand? That is simplest way to derive production possibility frontier. That's starting from labor allocation between two sectors and production function for Q1, production function for Q2. Then we can find from this labor allocation output mix of two goods, right? At every allocation of labor. That is production possibility frontier, right? That is explained from slide number 13, okay? Okay, 14. Use 4 quadrants diagram to construct production possibility frontier in figure 4.3. Lower left quadrant, right, this one, indicates allocation of labor, L1 plus L2 is L bar. Lower right quadrant, this one, shows production function for Q1, right? Upper left quadrant, this one, shows production function for Q2. And this one, the upper right quadrant indicates the combinations of Q1 and Q2 that can be produced, responding to labor allocations between two sectors, right? So figure 15, we can see the whole graph. This PP in the upper right quadrant shows the economic production possibilities for given supply of land, labor, capital. Due to diminishing returns, PP is bowed out curve instead of straight line, right? The production possibility frontier is, for example, like this, right? Q1, Q2. In microeconomic foundation, we studied that slope of this one, that is MRT, right? MRT is equal to changing Q1 over changing Q1 over Q2, absolute value of this one, right? That is this one, that is MRT, right? Diminishing returns labor in each sector can cause opportunity cost to rise. So MRT is the opportunity cost of Q1 in terms of Q2. I'm sorry. Becomes steeper and steeper and steeper. So like this. That is MRT. MRT rising. Opportunity cost of Q1 in terms of Q2 rising. Right? When an economy produces more Q1. Opportunity cost of Q1 in terms of Q2 is the slope of production possibility frontier. The slope becomes steeper as an economy produces more Q1. Anyway, everybody know this kind of thing, right? And slide number 16. So what is slide number 16? So we know how to calculate the MRT, right? So from optimal labor demand condition, we know that some wage rate in sector 1 is equal to P1 multiplied by VMPL, so MPL1, right? Similarly, from here we know P1 is equal to W over MPL1, right? Similarly, P2 is equal to W over MPL2, right? And profit maximization condition said price of that good is equal to MC1. That is equal to MC1. That is equal to MC2, right? And what's the definition of MRT? MRT is equal to MC1 over MC2. Thus, MC1 is W over MPL1, W over MPL2, right? Then what happened? W disappeared. Then MPL2 over MPL1. Okay? That is explained in 17 of our slide. Okay? So I'd like to skip this. Okay, now we go 19. Slide number 19. The demand curve for labor in clothing sector, MPL1 multiplied by P1 is wage rate. The wage rate is equals the value of marginal product of labor in manufacturing. The demand curve for labor in Q2 MPL2 multiplied by P2 is wage rate. So optimal labor demand condition we studied in microeconomic foundation, right? So from here, like this, right? So MRT is this one. MRT is increasing and increasing. More production of Q1 means MPL1 decrease. We know that MPL1 shaped rise, right? More production of Q1 meaning to decreasing marginal product of labor or increasing marginal cost, right? Less product, we moving here to here. More production of Q1, less production of Q2, right? Less production of Q2 means MPL2 increasing, so MRT increasing, right? That is explained. Okay, skip. Then now think about allocation of labor. Figure 4.4. So the two sectors must pay the same wage because labor can move between sectors, right? So now think about here. So we assume perfectly competitive market structure. That means W2 is P2 and PL2. But wage rate in sector 1 should be equal to wage rate in sector 2 because of assumption of competitive labor market. If wage rate in sector 1 higher than wage rate in sector 2, nobody wants to get a job in sector 2, right? So this one is saying to this one. Can you understand? Graphically, figure 4.4 is this one, right? What is this one? That is O1, that is origin point of Q2. right? And that is L bar. So I already studied that. That is O1, that is O2. And L1 plus L2 is L bar. So this one is L bar. Okay? That is L bar. At any point, that is L1, that is L2. So L1 plus L2 is L bar. This full employment condition of labor satisfied at any point on this straight line. Can you understand? And we know wage rate in sector 1 is P1 multiplied by MPL1. MPL1 is, for example, like this. And P1 is, for example, $10. Then P1 multiplied by MPL1 is maybe shaped like this. Right? That is P1 multiplied by MPL1. P1A multiplied by MPL1. Similarly, this graph is equal to like this, right? That is P2 multiplied by P2A multiplied by MPL2. Can you understand? So, labor is allocated, so the value of each marginal product or value of marginal product or marginal revenue product is same. So, at this range, right? That means that is OL1, that is O2L2. At this labor allocation between two sectors, wage rate in two sectors are same, equal. Can you understand? That is figure 4.4. Labor is allocated, so the value of each marginal product, price multiplied by MPL, is the same in the Q1 and Q2 sectors. In equilibrium, the wage rate is equal to value of labor's marginal product. Okay? So that is equilibrium point. Now then, what happened after free trade? So we know that our basic assumption is Korea has comparative advantage in Q1, right? And comparative disadvantage in Q2. Then what happened after trade? Right? The price of comparative advantage could increase after trade, right? And price of comparative disadvantage could decrease. Right? That is conclusion of neoclassical model, right? So that means P1 increase. P1T after trade price higher than P1A. Right? What happened in P2? P2 decrease. That means P2T lower than Otaki price. Actually, in Otaki situation, labor allocation occurs. Right? Like this. Right? At this situation, labor allocated like this. That is Otaki equilibrium point. Then what happened after trade? P1 increase. Then what happened? P1 increase. Right? P1 increase. MPL1, no change in MPL1. Only price of comparative advantage would increase. Right? Then this curve shift like this. That is P1T MPL1. Can you understand? Right? P1T higher than P1A. So we can draw like this. Then what happened in P2? Decrease. Then what happened? That is W2, isn't it? So this one shift like this. Right? That is P2T MPL2. Original equilibrium is here at point A. But now, new equilibrium point is here at point B. Right? Now think about this is A. So at Otaki point, labor L1 is equal to O1A. Right? L2 is equal to O2A. Right? But after trade, what happened? New equilibrium point is this one at P. Right? L1T is equal to O1B. And O1B greater than O1A. Labor employment in comparative advantage sector increase. Then what happened after trade? This one, right? Then L2T is O2B. that is ought to be, this is smaller than autarky labor employment condition. In other words, at this new equilibrium, at point B, labor employment in sector 1 compared to advanced in sector increase, right? So simply talking, Q1 increase because labor employment in sector 1 increase. And labor employment in sector 2 decrease compared to autarky level. So production of Q2 decrease. Okay? That happened. Now we go slide number slide number 33. Then, so anyway, speech factor is very important for political scientists because of prediction of income distribution. Right? Then what is the conclusion of this one? That is explained in slide number 33. 33. Owners of capital are definitely better off. Right? Owners are definitely worse off. Workers cannot say whether workers are better or worse off. It depends on the relative importance of clothes and food in workers' consumption. Right? So that is the conclusion of specific factor model. Right? The prediction of the conclusion of specific factor model. Owners of capital are definitely better off. Why? I already explained that owners of capital are definitely better off. In other words, rental rate of capital stock increase. Right? This one greater than autarky level rental rate of capital stock. Okay? Then we can say owners of capital are definitely better off. Okay? Landowners are losers. Why? That means RT smaller than RTA. Right? So landowners are losers, capital owners are winners. How to evaluate this one? Right? This argument is derived from changing marginal product of capital. Right? In optimal demand conditions that P1 MPK is equal to rental rate of land is need. Right? So real return to capital is MPK R over P1. If this one increase, right? If this one increase, we can say that, right? Real return to this one increase, right? So they are winners. So why MPK increase? Why? Then, first argument, owners' capital are definitely better. How to prove this? This one, MPK increase after trade. Right? Why? MPK is function of capital and labor, isn't it? Right? And capital, all K1 is K bar, so this one no change in capital stock. And shifters of MPK is labor, isn't it? Right? L1. And MPK is K over L1. And from here we know that labor employment increased from here to here after transition to free trade, right? Labor employment increase. Then shifters increase. Then marginal product of capital increase, right? Shift upward. That means MPK increase. So conclusion is owners of capital are definitely better off. Can you understand? And now think about landowners. Landowners is MPT. This one increase or decrease after trade? Basically, we know that MPT is equal to P2 multiplied by MPT is equal to rental rate of land, right? So MPT is equal to RT over P2, right? If MPT increase, landowners' real income increase, so they are winners. If this one decrease, then real return decrease, so they are losers. So our textbook said conclusion is this one decrease. Why that happen? Similarly, MPT is function of land, also shifters are labor, L2, right? This one isn't it? And from here we know that in autarky situation, this amount of labor employed. But after trade, decrease. This one decrease. Then MPT shift downward. Then real return to landowners decrease. So they are losers. Can you understand? But that is number 2 conclusion of slide number 33. Third conclusion is what happened in real wages? We cannot say whether workers are better or worse. We don't know. Right? Why? Think about. So similarly, this one is equal to MPL1. W2P2 is MPL2. We don't know. P1 increase and P2 decrease. Right? And labor, anyway, and finally wage rate same. This one should be equal to this one. Right? So the implication, prediction on wage rate is different across sectors. Okay? So we cannot say whether workers are better or worse. It depends on the relative importance of Q1 and Q2 in workers' consumption. Okay? So conclusion of species factor model, number 1, capital owners are winners. Capital, so usual production function of Q1 is L1 K bar. Q2 is L2 T bar. Right? This country has comparative advantage in Q1. Specific factor of comparative advantage good. Right? So owners of specific factors of comparative advantage good. In other words, capital owners are winners. Specific factor of comparative disadvantage good Q2. Right? Should be losers. That is conclusion number 1 and 2. And workers, implication on workers, ambiguous. Okay? Now we go 34 is not so important. Okay, so we'll finish it. So 33 to 38 is really easy. We already studied. Then we go slide number 39. International trade shifts relative price of clothes to food. So factor price changes. In full version is P1 increase, P2 decrease, so blah, blah, blah. Trade benefit the factors that is specific to export sector. Export sector is comparative advantage sector, isn't it? Right? Also, trade hurts the factor that is specific to import competing sector. Import competing sector means comparative disadvantage sector, right? Trade has ambiguous effects on mobile factors. Trade benefits the country by expanding choices, possible to redistribute income so that everyone gains from trade. Those who gain from trade could compensate those who lose and still be better off themselves. That everyone could gain from trade does not mean that they actually do, because redistribution usually has to implement. Simply talking, the summary of basic insight of slide number 14 is, after trade, national welfare increase, right? So, but there are winners and losers. If redistribution happens, trade gains, redistributed to losers, then everybody's welfare can increase. But that is, in real world, that usually not happen because redistribution is really difficult to implement it. Okay? That is slide number 40. Slide number 41. Trade often produces losers as well as winners. Optimal trade policy must weigh one group's gain against another's loss. Some groups may need special treatment because they are already relatively poor. For example, shoes and garments workers in the US, clothing workers in the United States, or agricultural farmers in Korea. Most economies strongly favor free trade. Right? 42. Typically, those who gain from trade are much less concentrated, informed, and organized group than those who lose. Right? Winners are much less concentrated, much less informed, much less organized group than losers. Example, consumers and producers in the US sugar industry, respectively. Okay? So full version of slide number 42 is collective action some idea we study in chapter 10. Consumers have collective action problem, simply talking, right? But inefficient losers has no collective action problem. So they did collective action against free trade. So protectionist policy is more popular than some free trade, right? Slide number 42 is some early version of collective action model. We study fully in chapter 10. Okay? Trade, slide number 43. Trade shift jobs from import competing to export sector, comparative disadvantage to comparative advantage sector. Process not instantaneous. Some workers will be unemployed as they look for a new job. How much unemployment can be traced back to trade? So lots of people, activists argue that free trade is a reason for unemployment. But that is not true. If we look at US data from 2001 to 2010, only about 2% of involuntary displacements or unemployments stem from import competition or plants moved overseas. Okay? So overseas. So some plants moving to overseas, then domestic employment decrease. Right? Another reason is because of free trade, domestic production decrease. That is main idea of protectionist policy activist group, right? But that is not true. If we look at US data, that is figure 4.12. Imports increase greatly, but unemployment doesn't increase after 1982. There's a wide gap between increase in imports and increase in unemployment. Okay? No relation, actually. Okay, I'd like to stop here. Thank you very much.